The old house stood tall and proud, a testament to time and memory. It held within its walls the echoes of laughter and the weight of generations past. Today, a shadow lingered, beckoning 11-year-old Daniel towards the unknown. The attic called him, a space untouched by time, where dust lay thick and heavy. Daniel felt a thrill, a mixture of fear and excitement. The attic door creaked open, its rusty hinges groaning in protest. A shaft of sunlight pierced the gloom, revealing a space frozen in time. Trunks, draped in faded velvet, promised forgotten treasures. He stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath his weight. The air grew colder, the scent of dust mingling with decay. Shadows stretched, twisting familiar shapes into grotesque figures. He was surrounded by remnants of a life lived, a family's history scattered in the dust. Daniel ventured deeper into the attic, each step leading him further into the unknown. The air grew colder, the silence more profound, broken only by the sound of his own breath. He ran his fingers along the spines of dusty books, their titles long faded, their secrets locked within their brittle pages. The musty scent of old paper filled his nostrils, transporting him to another time, a time of quill and parchment, of gaslight and shadows. The attic was a labyrinth of forgotten memories, each object holding a story, a whisper of the past. He paused before an antique mirror, its silvered surface tarnished with age, reflecting back a distorted image of himself. His heart quickened as he imagined the faces it had reflected over the years, the lives it had witnessed. A sudden noise, a soft thud from the far corner of the attic, sent a shiver down his spine. He froze, listening intently, his senses heightened. His gaze fell upon a large, ornately carved trunk tucked away in the deepest shadows of the attic. It was as if it didn't belong in this dusty haven of forgotten things, as if it were a visitor from another realm, a harbinger of secrets better left undisturbed. Drawn by an irresistible curiosity, Daniel cautiously approached the mysterious trunk. Its presence seemed to pulse with a strange energy, a silent hum that vibrated in the air around it. He reached out a trembling hand and traced the intricate carvings on its surface, feeling the coolness of the polished wood beneath his fingertips. The carvings were strange and unsettling, depicting grotesque figures with twisted limbs and malevolent grins. With a deep breath, he lifted the heavy lid of the trunk, the hinges groaning in protest as if releasing a long-held secret. The musty scent of aged wood wafted up, mingling with a faint, sweet aroma that sent a shiver down his spine. Inside, nestled in a bed of faded velvet, lay a marionette. Its porcelain face, frozen in a mocking grin, seemed to watch him with an unnerving intensity, its glass eyes glinting in the dim light. Daniel reached out, mesmerized by the puppet's lifelike quality. A chill ran down his spine, and he could have sworn he heard a faint whisper, a child's laughter echoing in the stillness of the attic. Daniel lifted the marionette from its velvet resting place. It was lighter than he expected, as if the wood and porcelain were mere shells, hollow vessels for something intangible. He turned it over in his hands, examining the intricate details of its construction. The puppet's limbs, connected by a network of delicate strings, moved with a lifelike fluidity that belied its inanimate nature. It was as if it were waiting, poised to spring into action at any moment. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a connection to the puppet, a sense of shared existence that both fascinated and unnerved him. Hesitantly, he pulled on one of the strings, watching as the puppet's arm rose in response. He experimented with the other strings, marveling at the puppet's responsiveness, the way it seemed to anticipate his commands. Section 2. Wooden Bones, Silk Strings. As the afternoon wore on, Daniel lost himself in the world of the marionette. He gave it a name, calling it Jasper, a name whispered to him by the dust motes dancing in the attic's musty air. With each passing hour, his movements grew more confident, more fluid. He moved the puppet's limbs with a practiced ease, giving it life, imbuing it with personality. The attic, once a place of shadows and forgotten things, transformed into a stage. Daniel, the puppet master, breathed life into the inanimate. Section 3. The attic stage is set. Daniel rummaged through the forgotten treasures scattered around the attic, searching for props to enhance his performances. He found a tattered velvet curtain which he draped over an old clothes rack, transforming it into a makeshift stage. A chipped teacup became a chalice, and a dusty book, its pages filled with forgotten spells, became a powerful magical tome. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the attic floor, Daniel found himself drawn back to the marionette. Section 4. Whispers in the Dust. There was a change in Jasper, a subtle shift that sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. The puppet's painted smile seemed wider, more knowing, its glass eyes glinting with an unnerving life. Daniel tried to ignore the unease creeping into his heart, telling himself it was just his imagination, the product of the attic's oppressive atmosphere. But as he moved Jasper's strings, he could have sworn he felt a resistance, a faint pushback, as if the puppet were trying to control its own movements. He paused, holding his breath, listening for any sound, any indication that he was not alone in the attic. The only sound was the whisper of the wind through the cracks in the walls, a mournful sigh that seemed to echo his growing fear. But deep down, a primal fear began to stir within him, a gnawing suspicion that something was terribly wrong. Section 5. The Puppet's Gaze. As darkness enveloped the attic, Daniel decided it was time to go. He gently placed Jasper back in the trunk, covering it with the faded velvet cloth. But as he turned to leave, he felt a chilling sensation, as if he were being watched. He glanced back at the trunk, his heart pounding in his chest. The attic was dark, the only light filtering in from the hallway outside. But in the shadows, he could have sworn he saw the faint glint of Jasper's glass eyes watching him, following his every move. Despite the growing unease that gnawed at him, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he and Jasper had formed a unique bond. He couldn't wait to return to the attic, to lose himself in the world of puppetry once more. Section 1. Strings of Attachment. The next morning, Daniel awoke with a strange restlessness, a feeling of anticipation that thrummed beneath his skin. He couldn't shake the image of Jasper from his mind. The way the marionette seemed to come alive in his hands. It was more than just a toy, more than a simple puppet. It was a conduit, a link to a world unseen, a world where imagination blurred the lines of reality. He rushed through his breakfast, ignoring his mother's concerned inquiries about his unusual excitement. The attic beckoned him, its silent call resonating deep within him. He felt an almost magnetic pull towards the dusty space, an invisible string tugging him towards the marionette that awaited him. The attic door creaked open, welcoming him back into its embrace. Section 2. The attic's embrace. Daniel went straight to the trunk, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings on its lid. He lifted the lid, the hinges groaning a familiar welcome. There, nestled in the faded velvet, lay Jasper, as if patiently waiting for his return. The marionette's porcelain face seemed to soften as Daniel picked it up, its painted smile taking on a knowing quality. He settled himself on the dusty floor, his back against a stack of forgotten books, and began to work the marionette's strings. His movements were instinctive now, fluid and precise. The outside world, with its mundane routines and expectations, faded away, replaced by the captivating realm of make-believe that Jasper inhabited. Section 3. A Mimic's Dance. As Daniel brought Jasper to life, he noticed something peculiar. The marionette's movements seemed to mirror his own. When Daniel raised his hand, Jasper raised his. When Daniel tilted his head, so did Jasper. It was as if the puppet was studying him, mimicking his every gesture, learning his every nuance. At first, Daniel dismissed it as a trick of the light, a figment of his imagination. But as the day wore on, the mirroring became more pronounced, more deliberate. It was as if an invisible thread connected them, an unspoken communication passing between the boy and the puppet. Section 4, Unseen Strings, Unspoken Commands. Later that evening at the dinner table, Daniel found himself mimicking Jasper's movements unconsciously. He tilted his head to the side just as he had made the puppet do earlier, his fork pausing midway to his mouth. His mother shot him a puzzled look. "Daniel, are you all right? You're acting rather strangely." Daniel mumbled an apology, suddenly self-conscious. He felt a strange tightness in his limbs, as if an unseen force were controlling his movements. That night, lying in bed, he could have sworn he felt a faint tugging sensation in his arms and legs, as if invisible strings were attached to his limbs. Section 5. The Reflection's Truth. The next morning, Daniel awoke with a start, his heart pounding in his chest. He rushed to the mirror, a sense of dread washing over him. The reflection that stared back at him sent a chill down his spine. His movements felt stiff, unnatural, as if his limbs were made of wood and string. He tried to smile, but his lips seemed frozen in a grotesque parody of the expression, a hollow imitation of genuine emotion. Terror gripped him as he realized the truth. The puppet master had become the puppet. Panic seized Daniel. He tried to raise his hand to his face to wipe away the growing terror etched on his features, but his arm felt heavy, unresponsive. It moved with a jerky, unnatural precision, like a marionette's limb responding to the tug of its master. His fingers, once nimble and sure, brushed against his cheek with a stiff wooden touch. His reflection mocked him, a grotesque caricature of his former self. His eyes, wide with fear, were now vacant and glassy, mirroring the unsettling gaze of the marionette. His lips, stretched into a horrifying grin, seemed to move on their own, whispering words he couldn't control. Jasper, always in control. He stumbled back from the mirror, a choked cry escaping his throat. He had to get help, had to tell someone what was happening, but his legs wouldn't obey. They moved with a marionette's jerky gait, each step forced and unnatural. He was trapped, his body a prison, his will usurped by the malevolent entity that now held the strings. Driven by Jasper's sinister will, Daniel returned to the attic, drawn to the dusty haven where his nightmare had begun. The old house seemed to creak and groan in sympathy with his torment, its shadowy corners whispering secrets of dark magic and forgotten terrors. He stumbled through the familiar rooms, his movements a horrifying spectacle of unnatural angles and jerky steps. His family, oblivious to his plight, continued their daily routines, their normalcy a stark contrast to the grotesque transformation consuming him. The attic door swung open at his approach, as if beckoning him into its embrace. The musty air, once strangely alluring, now carried the suffocating scent of decay and despair. The marionette, perched on its velvet throne within the old trunk, awaited his return, its painted smile a malevolent promise of further torment. With each passing hour, Daniel felt his own identity slipping away, replaced by the puppet's sinister persona. His thoughts became muddled, his words a jumble of half-formed sentences and eerie whispers. The world around him seemed to fade, its colors dimming, its sounds muted, as if he were watching a fading photograph of his former life. He spent his days in the attic, endlessly performing for an audience of dusk motes and shadows. Jasper, his movements now flawlessly fluid, acted out scenes of increasing darkness and violence, each performance a twisted reflection of the puppet's growing power. The attic, once a place of childhood wonder and imagination, became a stage for his macabre puppet show, a silent testament to the horrifying truth of his possession. He was no longer Daniel, the boy who loved stories and make-believe. He was merely a vessel, a hollow shell animated by the malevolent will of the demon marionette. Section 4. Trapped in a porcelain gaze. As days turned into nights, Daniel's reflection in the dusty attic window no longer showed his own image. Instead, it reflected the grotesque visage of Jasper, the demon marionette. His porcelain face, frozen in a terrifying grin, stared back at him, a constant reminder of his imprisonment. He desperately clung to fragments of memories, fleeting glimpses of the life stolen from him. His parents' faces, once sources of comfort and love, now appeared distant and distorted, their voices echoing faintly from a world he could no longer reach. Fear, cold and relentless, gnawed at the edges of his fading consciousness. He was trapped, his soul imprisoned within the marionette's painted grin, his fate sealed by the strings that bound him.
Check, check. Check 1, check 2, check, check.
Section 5. The Final Performance. One gloomy afternoon, as shadows stretched across the attic floor, Jasper's movements stilled. Daniel, his body a puppet responding to an unseen command, turned towards the attic door. The air crackled with a malevolent energy, a silent promise of something terrible to come. The attic door creaked open, revealing the silhouette of a figure standing in the hallway. Daniel's heart, or what was left of it, lurched in his chest. A name, distant and fragmented, surfaced through the fog of his mind. "Mom," he whispered,
check 1,
his
check
voice
2,
a raspy
check,
echo
check.
of its former self. The figure stepped into the light, her face etched with concern, but her eyes, wide with horror, were fixed on the grotesque figure that stood before her. The puppet master, now the puppet, forever bound to the will of the demon marionette. As Daniel raised his hand, his movements controlled by unseen strings, his mother's terrified scream echoed through the old house, a chilling prelude to the final, horrifying performance of the demon marionette. Section 1. The Mother's Reckoning. The attic stairs groaned under the weight of approaching dread. Daniel's mother, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror, ascended slowly, each step a testament to her unraveling sanity. The air grew thick, heavy with an unseen menace that clung to her like cobwebs. The scent of dust and decay, once merely unpleasant, now carried the sharp tang of fear. She called out to her son, her voice trembling, a fragile thread of hope in the suffocating silence. "Daniel? Honey, what's wrong?" Her words hung in the air, unanswered, swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere of the attic. The shadows seemed to deepen, twisting familiar shapes into grotesque mockeries of comfort and security. As she reached the top of the stairs, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging her to turn back, to flee from the unseen horror that awaited her. But a mother's love, fierce and unyielding, propelled her forward into the heart of the nightmare that had ensnared her son. Section 2. Echoes of Lost Innocence. The attic, once a repository of forgotten treasures and childhood dreams, now stood revealed as a chamber of unspeakable horror. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy windows, each tiny particle a swirling testament to the darkness that had taken root in this once familiar space. Her gaze fell upon her son, his back to her, his posture unnaturally stiff, his head tilted at an impossible angle. He stood before an old, ornately carved trunk, its lid thrown back, revealing a glimpse of faded velvet lining. A choked sob escaped her lips as she recognized the object clutched in her son's lifeless hand, a marionette, its porcelain face frozen in a grotesque mockery of a smile. The air thrummed with an unseen energy, a malevolent force that sent a shiver of primal terror down her spine. It emanated from the marionette, its painted eyes seeming to burn into her soul, its delicate strings pulling not just at her son's limbs, but at the very fabric of her reality. Section 3. The Marionette's Reign. Daniel turned, his movements jerky and unnatural, his body a puppet responding to the sinister will of the entity that now possessed him. Gone was the warmth in his eyes, the spark of mischief and imagination that had always shone so brightly. In their place, a chilling emptiness stared back at her, a void where her son's soul once resided. His lips, once quick to curve into a mischievous grin, now stretched into a horrifying parody of a smile, a grotesque rictus that revealed too many teeth. Words, hollow and chilling, rasped past them, each syllable a hammer blow to her sanity. "Mama, play with Jasper." The marionette in his hand, its porcelain head bobbing grotesquely, seemed to echo the sentiment, its painted smile widening as if in anticipation of a macabre performance. Section 4, Whispers on the Wind. The mother's scream, a raw primal shriek of despair, echoed through the old house, a sound that would forever haunt the rafters. She stumbled back from her son, her mind rebelling against the horrifying reality before her. Denial, swift and sharp, sliced through her terror. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Her son, her sweet, imaginative boy, couldn't be gone, replaced by this. But the truth, cold and undeniable, stared back at her from the depths of her son's vacant eyes. The attic, now a stage for a performance too terrifying to comprehend, held her captive in its grip. The air crackled with unseen energy, the whispers of a dark power that had woven its way into her life, stealing the very essence of her being. Section 5, A Forever Stage. The old house stood silent, its secrets locked within its creaking walls. The attic, once a place of forgotten memories, now held the echoes of a mother's shattered dreams, a testament to the insidious power of the demon marionette. And on the makeshift stage, bathed in the dust-filtered sunlight that streamed through the grimy windows, the performance continued. Daniel, his movements controlled by unseen strings, danced to the puppet master's tune, his laughter a chilling counterpoint to the silence that had descended upon the house. The demon marionette, its reign of terror just beginning, had found its forever stage, its strings forever entwined with the soul of the boy who had dared to awaken it from its slumber.